The rhythmic, metallic heartbeat of Henderson's auto shop was the soundtrack of Brookville. It was a normal Tuesday, meaning the air was thick with a sacred sense of motor oil and slightly burnt coffee. Under the hum of fluorescent lights, mechanics moved in a practiced, grease-stained ballet. The syncopated clink of wrenches, the sudden, sharp hiss of an air compressor, the low rumble of an engine coming to life. In the center of this organized chaos was Eli Turner. He was a man of few words, his communication often happening through the smooth turn of a socket wrench or the gentle tightening of a bolt. His reputation in Brookville wasn't just for his skill with engines. It was for his honesty, a rare currency he spent freely. He was a guy who would tell you your transmission was shot, but then spend his lunch hour calling junkyards to find you a cheap replacement. He had a big heart, and the town, in its quiet way, knew it. That morning, the shop's rhythm was interrupted by the slow, struggling scrape of metal on concrete. An elderly woman, small and frail as a sparrow, was trying to muscle her heavy electric wheelchair through the garage's main entrance. Her face was pinched with effort and a deep, flushing embarrassment. Eli looked up from the carburetor he was cleaning. In 3 long strides, he was at the door, his large, oil-stained hands gentle on the chair's handles. "Ma'am, let me help you," he said, his voice a low, calming rumble. She looked up at him, her eyes watery with gratitude and shame. "I'm so sorry, dear. I know this isn't the place for wheelchairs," she whispered, as if apologizing for her own existence. "But mine stuck. The front wheels jammed solid, and I don't have anyone else to ask." Her voice broke on the last word, a small crack that spoke volumes about loneliness and the quiet desperation of outliving your support system. Eli gave her a smile that reached his warm brown eyes, crinkling the corners. "Don't you worry one bit, Mrs. Coleman," she supplied. "Agnes Coleman." "Mrs. Coleman," he repeated, as if filing the name away for future reference. "You're in the right place. We fix things that roll in here, no matter how many wheels they have. Consider it taken care of." He carefully wheeled her chair into a clean corner of the bay, away from the dripping engines and slick floors. He fetched her a styrofoam cup of the bitter shop coffee, which she accepted with trembling hands. Then he got down on the concrete, ignoring the grime, and began his work. He wasn't just a mechanic for cars. He was a diagnostician of motion. With a gentle, probing touch, he identified the problem. A bent axle housing and a seized bearing, likely from a hard knock against a curb. He spoke to her as he worked, explaining what was wrong in simple, respectful terms, making her feel like a partner in the repair, not a charity case. But up in the elevated office, a fishbowl of glass and cheap wood paneling, Mr. Henderson was watching. He stood with his arms crossed over his considerable belly, his face a thundercloud. He didn't see a compassionate man helping a stranded senior. He saw a clock ticking, a billable hour vanishing. He saw a mechanic he paid $28 an hour kneeling on the floor, fiddling with a wheelchair for which he would never see a cent. His jaw tightened. To Henderson, the shop wasn't a community hub. It was a spreadsheet. And Eli's kindness was an unapproved expense, a line item that consistently read $0. He watched, his disapproval solidifying into a cold, hard decision, ready to descend from his perch and put a stop to this unprofitable charity. The clatter of the shop fell away as Mr. Henderson's heavy footsteps echoed on the metal stairs descending from the office. He was a man who viewed the world through a ledger, his soul a balance sheet, where kindness always showed as a loss. The sight of Eli, his most skilled mechanic, hunched over a wheelchair was an active hemorrhage of profit in his eyes. He stormed into the bay, his face flushed a mottled red against his crisp white shirt. "Eli!" he barked, his voice slicing through the garage's rhythm like a faulty piston. "What in God's name do you think you're doing?" Eli looked up, his expression calm but his eyes hardening. He kept his grip on the wrench, turning it gently. "Just fixing Mrs. Coleman's wheelchair, sir. The front axle's bent and the bearings seized. It won't take more than 10 minutes. This is an auto shop, not a charity." Henderson snapped, his voice rising, drawing the attention of the other mechanics, who had frozen in place. "We fix cars. Paying customers' cars. You think I'd pay you to tinker with old ladies' toys?" The word toy hung in the oily air, ugly and dismissive. Eli slowly rose to his feet, his 6'2" frame uncoiling. He wiped his hands on a rag, his movements deliberate. "It's not a toy, sir," he said, his voice low but firm, carrying a new, steely edge. "It's her legs. It's how she gets to the grocery store, to the doctor. It's her independence." But Henderson was a fortress, and empathy was a key he had long since thrown away. He wasn't listening. He turned his glare from Eli to the small, shrunken woman in the chair, his expression shifting into a mask of corporate concern. "Ma'am," he said, his voice dripping with a condescending, fake politeness that was more insulting than his anger. "I'm truly sorry for confusion, but we simply cannot work on medical equipment here. The liability issues are a nightmare. If something were to fail, the lawsuit could put us all out of a job." He spread his hands in a gesture of helplessness that was entirely manufactured. Mrs. Coleman's face, which had begun to brighten with hope, crumpled, the light in her eyes guttered out, replaced by a profound humiliation. She looked down at her lap, her frail shoulders slumping. I understand," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Her hands, gnarled with arthritis, fumbled for the joystick on her chair as she began the laborious process of backing away. Eli watched her retreat, and something inside him, a fundamental line of decency, was crossed. He couldn't stand there. Without a word to Henderson, he turned, grabbed his personal toolbox, the one filled with the specialized tools he'd bought with his own money, and gently took the handles of Mrs. Coleman's chair. "Where are we going, dear?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Just to a better-lit spot, Mrs. Coleman," Eli said calmly. He wheeled her out of the garage and onto the sun-warmed public sidewalk. He got back down on the concrete, ignoring the curious glances from passers-by, and finished the job. Within 10 minutes, as he'd promised, the wheel was turning freely. He refused a few wrinkled dollar bills she tried to press into his hand. "No, ma'am. You have a good day now," he said, giving her a genuine smile. When he walked back into the shop, the silence was deafening. The hiss of the air compressor had stopped. The radios were off. Every man was pretending to be busy, but their eyes were glued to the scene unfolding near the office. Henderson was waiting for him, arms crossed, a look of cold, final satisfaction on his face. "You're done here, Turner," the boss said, his voice devoid of any emotion. "Pack your things. You're fired." Eli stared at him, the reality of the words not quite computing. "You're firing me," he repeated slowly, disbelief warring with a rising anger. "For helping an old lady get her mobility back?" Henderson's lip curled. "I'm firing you for insubordination and for wasting company time on non-billable work," he barked, the corporate jargon a flimsy shield for his pettiness. He made a sharp, dismissive gesture toward the door. "You want to be a hero? You can go be a hero somewhere else. On your own time and your own dime." That night, Eli sat in his small kitchen, the yellow glow from the bare bulb overhead doing little to chase the shadows from the corners of the room. His gaze was fixed on the worn, red toolbox sitting on the linoleum table. It had belonged to his father, a man whose hands were always callous but whose heart was always kind. The sight of it usually brought comfort, but tonight it felt like an anchor. He didn't regret helping Mrs. Coleman, not for a single second. Finding her stranded at the grocery store with a cart full of groceries and a dead battery had been a no-brainer. He'd spent the better part of 2 hours with her, waiting for the tow truck, then driving her home. But the timing couldn't have been worse. A stack of past-due bills formed a precarious tower by the sink, a silent, accusing monument to his struggles. Rent was due in 3 days, and the eviction notice tucked under the sugar jar was a stark, final warning. He'd been to every workshop and garage in town this week, but the answer was always the same. "Sorry, Eli, not hiring." A heavy sigh escaped him, and he rubbed his temples, trying to massage away the beginnings of a tension headache. The silence of the cramped apartment felt oppressive. "Guess doing the right thing doesn't always pay off," he muttered to the empty room, the words tasting bitter. It was a lesson life seemed determined to teach him lately. Just as he was about to switch off the light and surrender to another sleepless night, a soft, hesitant knock echoed through the quiet. He frowned, checking the clock. It was nearly 10 p.m. cautiously. He opened the door to find Mrs. Coleman standing on his dimly lit porch, her silver hair haloed by the street lamp. She was clutching her shawl around her shoulders, but her smile was warm and unwavering. "Eli," she began, her voice as soft as worn velvet. "I just came by to say thank you properly. You didn't have to give up your evening for an old woman, but you did, without a second thought. You're a good man." Eli felt a flush of warmth that had nothing to do with the humid night air. He offered a tired but genuine smile. "Just doing what anyone should do, ma'am. It was no trouble." She shook her head slightly, a knowing look in her gentle eyes. "It's always trouble, dear. The measure isn't taken on anyway." She then reached into her large tapestry bag and pulled out a small, cream-colored card. It felt surprisingly heavy and expensive between his fingers. "If you ever find yourself in need of anything at all, you call this number. My grandson, well, he might be able to help." Eli glanced down at it. There was no name, no fancy logo, just a single, local phone number embossed in elegant gold foil. It felt out of place in his work-roughened hand. He assumed it was for a handyman service, or maybe a local charity her family supported. A kind gesture, but not a lifeline. "Thank you, Mrs. Coleman. I appreciate it. You have a good night now," he said, tucking the card into his pocket without a second thought. He locked the door, the encounter a brief, pleasant interruption in an otherwise bleak evening. As he lay in bed later, staring at the cracks in the ceiling, his mind was still occupied with calculations. Which bill could be postponed? Which pawn shop might give him a few dollars for his father's old watch? The small, gold-embossed card was forgotten on his kitchen counter, just a slip of paper beneath the glare of a single unlit bulb. When he finally drifted into a fitful sleep, Eli had no idea that the next morning, with one simple phone call, his entire life would change at exactly 8 a.m. Eli was woken not by his alarm, but by the deep, guttural rumble of multiple engines idling directly outside his window. The sound was foreign in his quiet neighborhood, a symphony of pure, restrained power that vibrated through the thin walls of his apartment. He stumbled out of bed, his mind still fogged with worries of bills and eviction, and peeked through the slats of the blinds. He froze. Lined up in perfect, intimidating formation along the curb were 7 identical black SUVs, their tinted windows and polished exteriors gleaming under morning sun. They looked less like vehicles and more like a fleet of armored beetles. As he watched, doors opened simultaneously, and a small army of men and women in impeccably tailored dark suits and discreet earpieces stepped out. They moved with a coordinated, fluid efficiency, their eyes scanning the surroundings with professional detachment. Eli's heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat of pure panic. "What in the world?" he breathed, his knuckles white where they gripped the windowsill. Had he accidentally witnessed something? Was this some kind of raid? Then, the rear door of the centermost SUV opened. A man in a suit offered a hand, and out stepped a figure Eli recognized, yet didn't. It was Mrs. Coleman. But the gentle, cardigan-clad woman from the grocery store parking lot was gone. In her place was a formidable presence in an elegant, sharply cut navy blue suit, her silver hair styled in a chic bob. She stood calmly, surrounded by her security detail, looking utterly at home in the center of the controlled chaos. She spotted his pale face in the window and gave a warm, familiar wave. "Good morning, Mr. Turner." His legs feeling like rubber, Eli stumbled out onto his small, weathered porch, barefoot and wearing a faded t-shirt and sweatpants. The contrast between him and the scene on his street couldn't have been more stark. "Mrs. Coleman," he managed, his voice cracking. What's going on? Are you all right?" One of the suited men, who seemed to be the lead security detail, stepped forward. He had a kind but firm face and offered a slight, reassuring smile. "Mr. Turner, allow me to properly introduce you to Margaret Coleman, founder and CEO of Coleman Mobility Technologies, one of the largest and most innovative manufacturers of medical devices and adaptive vehicles in the country." Eli blinked, his brain struggling to process the words. The sweet old lady with a dead battery was a titan of industry? "You're what now?" Mrs. Coleman, Margaret Coleman, chuckled softly, a sound that was both gentle and carried immense authority. "You thought I was just an old lady with a broken wheelchair, didn't you? I do like to take my new prototypes for a real-world test drive." You learn so much more that way. She walked up the path to his porch, her heels clicking decisively on the cracked concrete. She handed him a thick, cream-colored envelope. Inside is my card, my real card, and an offer. I saw how you treated me when you thought I was nobody. That kind of character isn't something you can teach. I need people with that integrity on my team. With trembling fingers, Eli opened the envelope. The paper inside was heavy, watermarked. It was a formal job offer for a senior mechanic and technical specialist position at her company's new flagship division dedicated to repairing and innovating custom mobility vehicles. The salary listed made his breath catch, triple his old pay, with full benefits, a signing bonus, and stock options. He looked up, his eyes wide with disbelief. I don't know what to say. Oh, and one more thing, Mrs. Coleman added, turning slightly to her security team. Her expression, while still pleasant, took on a steely edge. Make sure Mr. Henderson gets my regards. She turned her warm smile back to Eli. My property manager. It seems there was some miscommunication about your rent situation. Consider it handled. As Eli stood on his porch, the formal offer clutched in his hand, and the fleet of SUVs preparing to depart, the world he'd woken up in, a world of scarcity and fear, melted away, replaced by one of dizzying, impossible possibility. That same morning, a world away from Eli's stunned disbelief, Frank Henderson was holding court in his auto shop. Leaning against the counter, he sipped his bitter coffee and regaled a waiting customer with his favorite sermon. And like I told him, in this world, you either pull your weight or you get left behind, he said, jabbing a greasy finger on the formica for emphasis. I don't tolerate freeloaders. No, siree. That Turner kid, always putting kindness before business, had to let him go. It's a tough lesson, but a necessary one. The customer nodded politely, just as the sunlight from the open bay door was abruptly eclipsed. The deep, purring rumble of high-performance engines rolled into the shop, drowning out the classic rock on the radio. Frank frowned, setting his mug down with a clatter. What in the blazes? He stepped out into the morning light, his irritation turning confusion, then to a cold, creeping dread. 7 black SUVs, sleek and menacing, were parked in a perfect, silent line in front of his shop. Men and women in dark suits emerged, their posture rigid, their eyes hidden behind sunglasses. They didn't look like customers. Frank's bravado shriveled. Can I help you folks? He asked, his voice unnaturally high. The group parted, and Margaret Coleman walked forward. She had changed from the elegant suit into something more practical, yet still impeccably tailored, a sharp pantsuit that meant business. She looked at Frank's auto shop not with curiosity, but with the assessing gaze of a potential buyer. You're Frank Henderson? The one who fired Eli Turner for helping a stranded elderly woman, correct? Her voice was calm, devoid of anger, which made it all the more terrifying. Frank's mouth went dry. The story he'd been boasting about moments before now felt like a noose. Yes, ma'am. He abandoned a paid job. Is there a problem? Not for me, she said, her tone as smooth as glass. But for you? Possibly. She gestured, and an aide handed her a leather-bound folder. She extracted a single, heavy stock document and handed it to Frank. He took it, his hands trembling slightly. The bold letters at the top made his vision swim. Notice of acquisition and change of ownership. I've been planning to open a dedicated mobility and adaptive vehicle repair center in this neighborhood for some time, Mrs. Coleman explained, her voice still pleasant, as if discussing the weather. It's a growing need, and since you've so clearly demonstrated that you don't appreciate good principled mechanics, I've decided to expedite the process. I'll be bringing Eli back, effective immediately. She paused, letting the weight of her next words sink in. As the new manager, Frank's face drained of all color, leaving a blotchy, pale mask. The paper in his hand felt like it weighed 100 pounds. Wait, you can't do this. Oh, I can, she interrupted, her smile never faltering, though her eyes turned to ice. The transfer of funds to your holding company was completed an hour ago. The property, the business, the assets, it's all mine. I just did. She turned and walked back toward her SUV, leaving Frank standing on the oil-stained concrete, the document fluttering in his numb grasp. An hour later, a sedan from the Coleman fleet pulled up. Eli stepped out, still wearing his old jeans and work shirt, his face a canvas of overwhelmed emotion. He looked at his shop, as if seeing for the first time. Mrs. Coleman met him at the door and pressed a set of cold, metal keys into his palm. They were the same keys Frank had always jangled so arrogantly. "It's yours now, Mr. Turner," she said softly. "The tools, the bays, the future. Build it into something good, something that helps people." Eli looked from the keys in his hand to the woman who had seen his worth when no one else did. The stress of the past months, the fear, the humiliation, it all broke over him at once, and tears welled in his eyes, spilling over onto his cheeks. "Thank you, ma'am," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I won't let you down." Margaret Coleman placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "I know you won't," she said, her smile finally reaching her eyes, warm and genuine. "You already proved that in a grocery store parking lot."